Hello, everyone. I am Conor Hewitt. I'm going to be talking today about design tokens. What are they? How to use them? You probably know how to use them a bit more than I do by the sounds of it, but give it a go. So I'm Conor Hewitt. I'm a design consultant at Deloitte Digital. I've been there for over 3 years now. But for the past year, I've been kind of managing and creating a design system for one of our clients. It's got quite a lot of designers using it. There's about 11 designers using it, and there's about 30 developers referencing it on a day-to-day basis. But starting it from scratch, so it was building it up, and this is kind of how I'm talking about design tokens, I suppose. It's my journey of problems that I've caused by not having design tokens and consistency and stuff, and how I've gone to kind of find design tokens as a kind of methodology to follow. So yeah, that's okay. So what are design tokens exactly anyway? So there are 1,000,001 definitions out there, but here's the one that I like anyway. Design tokens are style values that are semantically named and stored as platform agnostic code, which can then be transformed and used in a platform specific way. So if we break that down even more, just so it's a nice couple of points here, design tokens are style values, design tokens are semantically named, design tokens are stored as platform agnostic code, and they're transformed and used in a platform specific way. Maybe wonder why I've written these all out in bullet point lists, because I'm going to cover them now as little topics. So just in case any of you don't know, design tokens are style values. What do I mean by style values? Style values are the smallest parts needed to construct any user interface. So these are your colors, your sizes, spacing, border radius, animation, opacity, font family, you name it, it's there. These are, but in fundamental terms, in more practical terms, actually, for us to be building with them. If we look at this button, you can see the button. It's not just a button though, it's a series of those style values that I just spoke about. It's built up of those. So you can see it's made up of a background color, border radius, padding, text color, font family, font size, font weight, line height. This kind of leads me to my next part about semantic naming. Design tokens are semantically named. So we are human beings, not machines. Raw values like we see here for these buttons don't actually speak for themselves. So by adding a semantic name to them, we can communicate the design value in a much easier way. So as you can see here, it's no longer just a hex code. It's button primary. It's no longer just 20 pixels corner radius. It's corner radius or border radius large, and so on and so forth. Which leads me to a kind of little bit of a quote. I've used a couple of quotes throughout this presentation, so bear with me. But this kind of quote helped kind of solidify this with me about the importance of semantic naming and why design and development communication sometimes breaks down. Roses are FF000, violets are 624DE3, design tokens are sweet, and so are you. It's from an article that I read a while ago. So that kind of hammered it home a little bit for me as well about the importance of naming. Obviously, there are 1,000,001 ways that you can name things. I'll not go into that now because we don't have time, but most important thing is that your design tokens are well named and kind of communicate a common language between everyone in the kind of project. So moving on after that lovely quote, design tokens are stored as platform agnostic code. What do I mean by that? Well, platform agnostic code, in my experience, comes in the form of JSON. The process that we've gone through at the moment in our project is that the designer, me, creates the tokens within their design tools. I'll talk a bit about design tools in a bit, but that tool then generates the JSON for those styles. Then the designer pushes those design tokens in JSON to a repo, in our case, GitHub. But at the end of the day, that's where kind of my part ends, almost as a designer. But this is great and all, but not all platforms can use that same kind of platform agnostic code. It's platform agnostic. So what is next? As I said, the JSON by itself won't work on all of the platforms. Every platform has its own nuances. So that's where the next kind of point of the definition comes in. Design tokens are transformed and used in a platform specific way. So as you can see here, because our design tokens are created and stored in a platform agnostic way, we can now transform them to meet the needs of any of the platforms like web, iOS, and Android. This transformation can be done in so many different ways. The way we do it at the moment on my project is we they use this service called Style Dictionary that's actually created by Amazon for some reason, very strange. But that does a lot of the transformation legwork for us. So it takes all of that agnostic code that we have in our repo, we've automated it, and that spits out into the other individual repos that we individual kind of areas that that would need. So in my project case, it's an iOS app and an Android app. But regardless of the kind of transformation, the point is that you can actually tailor these design tokens to specifically fit the platform you're working on. And I'll talk a bit about the benefits of that in a little bit. But when you do the transformation, you can set it up so that your developers on all of those platforms, regardless of what they are, can just pull those down as a dependency. They can pull down the latest tokens instead of having to manually update those styles. So I've spoken to you all about design tokens, like the definition of like a little bit about the benefits, but why would you actually do this and why use design tokens? So I'll talk a bit about the benefits that I found in kind of my experience, but they help with consistency. So with design tokens, designers and developers can now use the same styles with the same naming scheme that all come from the same place. We're no longer using, I'm not using styles that are specifically named and created in Figma or Sketch and then telling you, oh yeah, can you do that too? We're using the exact same ones. The tokens that I'm generating are the tokens that the designers are using that are using the system, and you're using the same tokens as well, and the developers using the same tokens, everything like that. And this all happens no matter what the team is, the platform or the product, which creates obviously good amounts of consistency because we're all using the same tools or resources. Then because of this, they create a unique kind of source of truth for your styles. And although they don't kind of bridge the gap fully between design and development, they do help. As a developer as well, the benefit of this is that you no longer have to go into Figma and find and copy the hex codes that you need for one of your kind of components. And you just have to type in the token name. And this kind of leads me on to another kind of little quote here that I got from another talk that I watched a wee while ago. Facebook had 700, obviously, so just for context, this is from a little while ago. I would like to think Facebook aren't as bad now, but Facebook had 706 CSS files. They declared the color Facebook blue 261 times. They used 548 unique hex values for colors and had 6,498 declarations of color. So the kind of main benefit I would imagine here is if design tokens were implemented here, it would improve these statistics quite vastly. Obviously, I feel like that would be quite easy, to be honest. But you don't have a couple of CSS files, but they would all be centrally managed within that kind of GitHub repo. You would have one Facebook blue that was kind of propagated out, and a lot less unique hex codes because it would all come from the same source. Obviously, feel free to correct me if this looks perfectly normal to anyone. I will take that, but to me, with my limited knowledge, I think that looks a bit mad. Then moving on to the next benefit I found around efficiency. So we can remove our style values from XML or Sass and move them to a centralized repo like we mentioned. And with this, it allows us to easily update any styles within a single place. So if I was to kind of need to update any sort of branding color within the design system or my project, or say the company wanted to change their brand color, I can just go and change the one token I have that represents that brand color. Then that will propagate out to all of the other instances that are kind of nested in that, all the other platforms within one push to GitHub. Then all the other developers, like I mentioned, can just pull that down from there. And another case study here, not really a quote, but in 2015, Spotify rebranded, but they changed their kind of brand guidelines, but the main thing was they changed the color. But because of that small change, you might go, oh, that's not going to take that long. But because of how their system was set up, it took several months to propagate out that new green color to all of their platforms. But now, thanks to setting up an actual design system that's based on design tokens as their foundations, it takes them only a couple of minutes to do any sort of massive change like that. Then moving on to the next point, scalability. On a very similar vein to efficiency, because the style values are removed from any specific code base, you don't have to create the styles from scratch if and when a new digital platform comes along. So you can just push, your core kind of brand style values out, do some custom transformations that will probably be helped quite a lot with Style Dictionary, and then you have your color styles ready to use in the kind of tools that the developers that we build in that platform are used to. And then moving on to more of the kind of main last point here is that design tokens help to create a common language between designers and developers. I touched upon this a little bit before, where it doesn't quite bridge fully. I think that will never happen because two different jobs, don't want them to be the exact same. That'd be weird. But it helps bridge that communication gap at least anyway with a common language. So everyone can communicate a lot easier. You're not just referencing hex codes. You're not just referencing these like kind of non-human raw values. You're talking about actual things that make sense. And even other disciplines that aren't designers or developers, like your BAs or your product owners or other stakeholders, can kind of understand at least what you're talking about and what the problems are and what the kind of areas that you're targeting. So then, as a bit of a designer bonus benefit here, because obviously I'm a designer, I'm not a developer, I found that this is almost like a really, really good learning exercise, because I find that a few designers that I've worked with in the past don't really understand development processes, and it's almost like here's a screen, chuck that over, make that. Whereas with this, it's been a very much like, okay, I'm thinking this is the process that I want to improve. This is the design token process that I understand. Then I just went and spoke to a load of developers on all the different platforms and go, how do you want this? How I have this color, this is what I can provide you. How do you want this? And then they can tell me, and then that can inform the transformation, inform the automation, and it makes things just a lot happier. Also, more on a selfish design side, because of how the tooling works for designers, we're incredibly limited to be able to store those individual kind of style values, like I mentioned before. It's only recently that we've been able to like have a Figma plugin that allows me to do that, which is amazing, because before we were never able to store small values like font weight, specifically spacing, corner radius. We were never able to store those. We were just able to group them as here's typography, spacing just doesn't exist anyway, and corner radius just doesn't exist within design kind of tools at the moment, unfortunately. But obviously with design tokens and a plugin or two, I can do that now, and it feels really, really good to be able to provide developers with actual usable kind of tokens and stuff like that. So in conclusion, just before so I can wrap up here, design tokens are a great methodology to kind of communicate design decisions, aka your style values, but they help build consistency across all of your product UI in an efficient and scalable way. But although design tokens are great and all, and I've spoken about a couple of the benefits, and I definitely have reaped the benefits of that on my project, they're not a replacement for good communication with your team by any means at all. Nothing really beats just sitting down with your designer or developer on your team and talking something through and just chatting, getting to understand each other's ways of working, process, thinking, all that kind of stuff. And then before I end here, I'll go to a little quote that I really like. This is a quote from one of the developers on my team. It's one of the developers that helped me set up the automation for the design token process on my project. Said, going to be cool. Whatever changes you make to your design tokens can change the entire app colors without any code change. You could even change the entire app to be pink if you wanted to. And yeah, that's it from me. Does anyone have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Conor. I like that little bit at the end there. That was very good. I enjoyed
Thank you.
that.
That was the whole presentation, honestly.
Yeah. Like I've forgotten everything else before that.
Yeah, definitely.
So we had a couple of questions come through. So is it tooling such that you can export variations of the design system, for example, like light and dark sets?
Yeah. So you can do that. So the tool that I use for Figma is called Figma Tokens. I think it's actually just literally rebranded to Token Studio. But basically it in itself allows you to create kind of different token sets for different themes like light and dark. The way that me and my the designers that use the kind of system that I have created, we actually set it up so that there's separate library files within Figma. So we have a light kind of color library file, dark color library file, each with their own kind of unique set of token themes. This is kind of also as well because they charge you for if you want to have multiple sets to be exported. Unfortunately, you can't If you don't pay for it, it doesn't allow you to export those individually as sets. To be honest, I'd like the project I work for should definitely be able to afford it, but yeah, unfortunately, to get around this, the developer had to write a lot of custom scripts as well to be able to even set up the different kind of sub levels of the tokens for colors at least. But
yeah, it's obvious that that feature is very useful, and that's why they put it on a premium behind a paid flag.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh God, sneaky Figma.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so another one came through as well. Any tips or tools online in like animation design tokens? This has been a tricky topic in the past. A few companies, since animation implementations can be very different between platforms.
This is something that we're kind of currently working through at the moment as well. It's I found with like your quite basic stuff, so like your colors, your typography, they're quite easy to be translated in a quite straightforward way between different platforms. But when it comes to animation, it's the nuances between the platforms almost make it so difficult to create just one central source because they just use them in such different ways. I suppose if you break it down, like one way that we've seen, but to be honest, this is mainly for web that I've seen this being used on my project, and it's only ever been used with kind of duration or like the kind of animation type, and it's been quite custom. It's like we can't really do that in Figma. It would have to be coded, if you know what I mean, and then stored in a kind of separate way. Again, limitations of tooling and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that is just generally a bit of a tough area. I think there needs to just be a lot more custom kind of, tokenizing, I suppose, for each platform.
Yeah, because I think it's very interesting, like especially with the animation stuff. If you're building a web app, like it would maybe export some like keyframe CSS tokenization, but then when it comes to like an Android or an Apple app, or how is it translating that across those different platforms? Because you kind of span those targets as well. Like how have you found the tokens coming out of Figma and then being consumed by developers maybe on different languages, different frameworks, different kind of levels of understanding?
Yeah, so it's like it's been great to be able to understand what the developers, even on those different platforms within those specific code bases, actually like prefer. Because I remember I spent like ages coming up with a naming scheme, like being like sitting there with the developers being like, should I use kebab case? Is that okay? Should I use sentence case? And then didn't realize that the transformation actually just changed it to whatever the developers fancied. So the iOS developers on the project I'm on in their code base, they actually have it as kebab case, I think, and then or some specific case. And then I was just like, oh, what? So like it didn't actually matter what case it was that I used, and they're like, no. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, like it's interesting, especially when it comes to I think typography is a really good place to start when it comes to tokenizing things, because typography, like I said, is not just here's your H1. It's not just a H1. It's your line height, your font weight, all that kind of stuff. But the platforms just have different metrics. So like you have to also set up the equation for like, okay, I use pixels, you use EMs, or you use DP, and it's just like, okay, like what's the equation for this? What this amount of pixels mean in this? And then you set that up in the kind of transformation. Thankfully, Style Dictionary does a lot of this, but yeah, it's a learning curve, and it's very. I think every designer needs to do something similar like this, or at least understand a bit more about development processes and how they actually build things, because a lot of time it's just like, well, I've done it. It's on my screen. I can interact with it. Can you not do that? And it's like the amount of times I hear people going, oh, we've done this, and then they come to me as if like, do you reckon this can be done? And I'm like, you have developers on your team. Why are you asking me? I don't like talk to them. They're like, oh, well, it's done now. We're just getting it reviewed. And it's like, oh no. Sorry, that was a bit too much there. But
oh no, that's actually so good. Like it was something I was thinking about myself. I was going to hopefully ask you, like with that kind of thought process, like it sounds like you have been like close to developers before. You're like you're kind of thinking how the developers think when they're consuming like design work and how things going on. Like, is there that kind of learning curve of like trying to choose the words rightly here, but like, the standard designer to the designer who's like, had more experience doing handoffs to the engineering teams. When you're building out these tokens and thinking about design tokens, is there like a learning curve to kind of get to that point where what needs to be done and how it should be done, like thinking in pixels and that kind of thing?
Yeah, like I mean, it's fundamentally, I think like designers think differently to developers, and that's why I kind of feel like I'm not a developer, but I wouldn't class myself as almost like a UI designer, because I just do system work. Like I'm like a system. The job titles are like librarian, and that just sounds awful. But yeah, there is definitely a learning curve, and I'm still learning that kind of stuff. I'm trying to do like Swift courses, or sorry, Swift UI, like courses on the side, try and understand a bit more about Android. Just understand like the nuances, and like I'm not gonna lie, like some of the documentation that some of these like material and human interface guidelines are awful sometimes, especially for people that like can't just go into the development documentation and go, oh well, yeah, of course I knew you couldn't round the corners on those fields there, of course. Yeah, just a lot of a learning curve, so it is, and still going like.
Yeah, and that's really these kind of things, like you're building a framework, you're building that connection, building that ideology, and it'll continue to grow. And someone's going to come in someday and bring something new to the table. And even I was actually kind of thinking that back to like even Victoria's talking like how would do something work? Does this then feed into like a design system that you like use and work to like kind of share this across the different tools? Like, is this like when you're mentioned about the whole Facebook blue, do you have like a Deloitte green, I want to say?
So it's not for Deloitte. So I can't tell you the client.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Just part of that. But it's basically with tokens. I've obviously not gone into the complete detail of like how there's a million one ways you can set them up, but a lot of them allow you to have abstraction, which design tools just do not allow you to have. So the way that we currently have it set up is that it actually works for any brand. So the client I work for, he has like their core palette. What I do is I take their core palette, I extend that over like maybe like 10 extra steps above and below. I then create base tokens, what I call them as base tokens, which are just like they're named what they are, if you know what I mean. So if that's a red, I call it red, red 10, red 20, red all the way up, and all that kind of stuff. And then what they do, they act as like a source to feed into more contextual tokens, or like use case based. So they'll feed into actual specific, like this could be I'm trying to think, like background primary, background secondary, background tertiary, like, or text reverse, text primary, text. I'm butchering these. It's been a while, but yeah, like they'll feed into more contextual ones. So basically, what happens then is if the client will have a couple of extra brands that they would like to test, like to see what the interface would look like with their brand, instead of me as a designer having to go in and then have to kind of do a mock-up, if you know what I mean. I can literally just be like, I turn that on, plug it into here, and obviously in an ideal world it would just work. It'd be accessible, it would be perfect, but no, you obviously need to do a lot more kind of QA testing, a lot of kind of design QA testing and development testing. But yeah, that's the way we've set it up anyway. But you can have, I think like Adobe have like 3 levels of abstraction, and they all have, every company has their own name for each level. So there's loads of different ways you can do it.
Oh yeah, okay, that's really cool. Yeah, I've seen that used Notices before, and I think it's like a really good pattern going forward. It's awesome to kind of see that in practice and hear about it. Again, thank you so much. Like that was an amazing talk, super interesting topic. Learned a lot.